probably after a long day at the practice. And we're going to be covering veterinary practice transitions in 2025, what you need to know for success. We're here to kind of dive into the future and current state of veterinary practice sales in 2025. A market where deals like the most recent $8.6 billion MVP SVP merger are reshaping opportunities out there for buyers and even sellers that have smaller practices that are still private practices. For the first time, owner sales are also taking place, which I'll add over the last 12 months. Private sales actually made up about 50% of Omni's transactions out there. So definitely know, yes, there are still private sales going on and not everything is corporate. The reality is there's a lot of information I'm going to try to share with all of you this evening. Some of these things are items that in areas that you experience daily in your practice. It's not necessarily tied to a corporate practice. It's not tied to a one DVM or a multi DVM practice. It's industry wide. My hope is to educate you on a couple nuggets of wisdom. And if you have additional comments or questions, we'll definitely have a Q&A at the end. And if you're worried that you might forget as we go through the presentation, feel free to put it into the chat and we'll circle back and look at that. So I'm hoping to empower your knowledge, empower your path forward, whether that's as a buyer or a seller, really helping you come up with solutions and a plan. I'll be covering the corporate world, the private owner world, things that you can do to prepare to buy a hospital, as well as general areas of information happening in the industry, as well as information on selling a hospital if you're currently an owner. So this is me, Max Truesdell. I live in Arvada, right next to Golden. I do have my Colorado real estate license to be able to do a business broker or real estate transaction in the state. For Omni, I cover the Mountain West region, all the way to the Southwest region. So really, that mountain corridor, excluding the Pacific Northwest and California. I've participated and led acquisitions and practice sales of over $10 million in EBITDA. Really specialize in identifying and executing high impact opportunities that align either with a corporate buyer or a private buyer or a seller. I have worked on the corporate side for over 6 years, so I'm very familiar in what corporate groups are looking for, and we're going to cover some of that information today. And I've got over 25 years of experience in both the human and animal industry. This is Rod Johnston. Rod started Omni in 2004. He's based out of the Seattle area, is a licensed commercial broker in 7 states. He's got a certified management accountant role. He's also the past president of the National Association of Practice Brokers. He's very instrumental in all the valuations that we conduct for our clients and has completed over 1,000 valuations, not only in veterinary, but also in dentistry, ophthalmology, and some other healthcare focused areas, and personally has sold over 250 practices. So the Omni Veterinary Division was founded 11 years ago. You'll see in that third bullet point, these are some of the associations or accreditations that we're required to get to be able to be excellent at our job in supporting our clients. In general, we've transitioned over 400 practices, and that's representing both buyers and sellers. I consider Omni kind of a boutique brokerage group where you're going to get personalized service, transparency, trust, and integrity. It's not big box in any way. There's not a practice sale or acquisition that is too big or too small. We try to help everybody out there in the industry. And we have a lot of experienced consultants on our team that are veterinarians, CPAs, MBAs with over 100 years of combined experience. It's kind of our team here. Two of our brokers are still practicing veterinarians. We've got two CPAs or CMAs, three certified valuation analysts. Everyone is a licensed commercial real estate broker. And then we also have 4 marketing staff members to help us support promoting and marketing a practice once it's ready to go. And then we also have 4 former practice consultants and 2 former office or practice managers on the team that are very familiar with the world that all of you walk in every day. So some of the services that we provide, practice transitions to sellers, buyer representation or seller representation. We do not represent both in a deal, so there's no dual agency. We offer valuations, and that can be all that you do to work with us. From a real estate standpoint, we help people do startup practices, lease negotiations, acquisitions, and dissolutions if they're closing the practice. And we also can provide consulting to prepare your practice for sale. So kind of the current state of the market, veterinary practices in general are going, very strong. The average annual spend on pet care in 2013 was $460. And compare that to 2024, it's all the way up to $1,500 per client. Now, this is kind of a tale of 2 different worlds, and it's going to be curious to see how all this plays out. But discussing the shortage of veterinarians in North America, in 2023, Mars projected a shortage of 15,000 veterinarians by 2030. And then just last year, the Breaky Consulting Group did a project for the AVMA, and they suggested there was going to be no shortage at all, projecting a 20% increase in veterinarians by 2030. So it's going to be very interesting to see whose model and whose study, was done more accurately. And the USDA in 2023 identified that there's over 237 rural shortages across 47 states. And, and speaking to veterinarians all over the Mountain West, I firmly believe that, our region of the country is probably affected more than maybe other areas. But there is an increase in veterinary schools that are starting to pop up in the Mountain West. And I think that over the long run, whether it's 5 years or 10 years, that's really going to help support the industry in the Mountain West area. And then obviously, the cost of veterinary education continues to rise. Most students are coming out of school with anywhere between $155,000 to over $400,000 in student debt that they're carrying and having to pay off. Corporate sales are still taking place, but the requirements are changing in what they're looking for. They have a much more laser focused on what the groups are looking for, much stricter rules on what they'll be able to submit an offer for. Mainly corporate groups are looking for multi-doctor practices, a minimum of $2 to $2.5 million in revenue. Many times they're trying to cluster current corporate locations that they have in certain communities so that they can pair up staffing, utilize resources more effectively. And in general, they are looking at larger population metro areas. There's still a lot of single doctor practices that are for sale across the country, as well as acquisitions that are taking place, whether it's through an associate path or whether it's an associate from another practice that's looking to become a first-time owner. Bank financing is plentiful. Many banks have actually opened up specific divisions within their bank departments, just focusing on supporting the veterinary community. They look at the veterinary space as a safe investment. It's a stable business. It's a stable platform. And typically when an owner comes into, whether it's an isolated building by itself or within like a retail plaza, they can really count on them for being there for 5, 10, 15 years or longer as a tenant. And I definitely want to stress that individual practice ownership is definitely not going away. Private ownership is alive and well, and individuals are still actively buying and thriving in practice ownership. So just kind of from an overview and background on corporate buying, corporate consolidation kind of started in the mid 90s when Mars bought into Banfield versus Bars buying into Manfield. There were only a handful of consolidators in the 90s and the early 2000s versus fast forward to today, there's approximately 60 to 100 active veterinary corporate and private equity consolidators throughout the US. And the numbers they seem to fluctuate a little bit based on if they merge together, if they're just entering or they're exiting through a recapitalization. In 2025, corporate consolidators, many of them backed by some of these large PE groups, the data shows that they own about 25 to 50% of general veterinary practices and about 75 to 80% of specialty and emergency practices out there. And through some of those numbers and data points, the estimates suggest that corporate consolidators own between 25 and 50% of all companion, which is up 10% over just a decade ago. And then if you look at some financial market trends from 2017 to 2023, PE firms invested $51.6 billion into the veterinary sector, with an additional $9.3 billion just last year, kind of fueling and furthering the consolidation that's taking place. In 2023 alone, consolidators acquired 500 independent practices, and only between 700 and 800 practices were acquired in prior years. So that's definitely kind of taken over independent transactions that are taking place across the country. So the Brackey Consulting Group estimates that about 50% of all veterinary revenue is from a corporately owned practice, which makes sense if they are multi-doctor practices and they also have 75% of the market in specialty and emergency. Corporations were paying as high as a 25 times EBITDA prior to 2023, but we've really seen things level out, post-COVID. Some financial market interest rate turmoil that we've seen. And in general, most practices now are going anywhere between an 8 and 12 multiple, with an average being a 10 multiple. If we talk a little bit about the recapitalization in corporate world, I wanted to kind of give you an example of the most recent merger and recapitalization that took place, and also kind of do a deep dive into what is recapitalization. So just this past August of 2024, MVP and SVP announced plans to merge and create one of the largest veterinary networks in the US. The merger was finalized this past December. It was backed by Shore Capital Partners and Silver Lake, and has an estimated value of $8.6 billion. SVP and MVP now operate over 750 practices across 41 states, and now they rival other consolidators or large groups like Mars, who owns over 3,000 practices worldwide, NVA or National Veterinary Associates, owning over 1,400, and VetCor owning over 850 hospitals. And these totals include both general and specialty and emergency hospitals. The values and offers have gone down a little bit since 2022, but they're still very aggressive and very beneficial for sellers if they're negotiated properly. So as the corporate buyers come out there, they're still active. They're still offering different types of financial models and offers to owners. They include kind of a breakdown of distributions of cash at closing, equity or top co, which could be in your practice, or it could also be in the overall firm itself. Production bonuses, recruiting and mentoring bonuses, but there definitely is an uptake in the requirement for longer employment terms. Around COVID, prior to COVID, many of our sellers would be able to get away with a 1-2 year employment agreement, maybe 3 years at max. And now typically a lot of the groups are either requiring 5 years or they're starting the employment agreement negotiation at 5 years. And that potentially can be negotiated down to 4 or 3 years. And one of the things that Omni does, and having experience in negotiating so many different corporate offers, is we'll be able to negotiate the terms of that agreement and what are in your best interest and what's most important to you. So don't discount that experience. And then we talk about equity. Don't discount the value of your equity, the value of your hospital. Many corporate groups are planning to do a recapitalization over the next 1 to 5 years, kind of based on the timeline and the funds that they have to continue to acquire. And I have a lot of doctors that say, well, what is a recap? What is a recapitalization? So basically, a recap refers to a major financial event where a corporate group or a consolidator sells a large portion, if not all of its equity, to a new investor. Basically, it's a new PE firm that has a larger check that they can write. And many times what we see is the recapitalization takes place when the original owners, let's say they own 150 hospitals. Their firm, their organization is only equipped to kind of manage that number of people from an HR standpoint, from a recruiting standpoint. And maybe even that might be all the money that their current PE firm has to be able to acquire any more hospitals. So at that point, the owners of that platform decide to sell to a larger group who can handle more employees, has better processes and plans in place to be able to manage that higher number of hospitals, to go from 150 to maybe 300. Really, in simple terms, it's a second sale. It's a liquidity event. It's not for just one single practice, but it's for the entire platform that owns that many hospitals. And just kind of closing out corporate here, what type of practices are they buying? 2 or more doctors. They're looking at larger facilities. They will definitely analyze the number of exam rooms that you have and your actual square footage of your location. They're going to analyze and look at urban locations and some rural. They're going to look at high revenue generating practices. Are you offering innovative therapy options for clients? And they absolutely are going to look at staff turnover. What are the percentages over the past 12 months? And they'll kind of analyze that over the last 2 to 3 years. If it's high turnover, they're going to do a deep dive into why is that taking place. Some of the problems that corporate groups have, probably the same ones that you have as an owner right now. A lot of the larger portion multi-doctor practices have already sold. They don't have as many targets to go after. Some veterinarians do not want to sell to corporate in any way, shape, or form. They would rather close their doors if they can't find an associate or a private buyer. They are a little bit risk adverse in buying single doctor practices. If something were to happen from a health standpoint or an injury standpoint, they don't have anybody in the hospital or maybe in their local area that can come in, facilitate, take over. That revenue drops immediately. They have issues negotiating with associates, whether it's trying to do recruiting bonuses, benefits, numbers. Where are the candidates? There's only so many coming out of school every year. And then in some cases, what some of them done, because the multiples had escalated so quickly, they were actually looking at models where it's cheaper to do a new startup and build from scratch, even though you don't have any kind of book of business, versus buying an established practice that does have a book of business. So as we've talked about it, this graph kind of ties to the Mars report. They were stating that nearly additional 41,000 veterinarians would be needed to meet the demands of companion animal healthcare by 2030. If you factor that number over the next 10 years, we would still be short by 15,000. Sometimes what happens is they'll acquire a practice, the owner fulfills that employment agreement, and then they retire immediately. The hope from a lot of corporate groups is they've provided such a good model that owner is going to want to continue to stay on despite, stressing what their exit strategy was to begin with to get to retirement or reduce hours or reduce number of days working. And then sometimes what happens is sellers will fulfill their employment agreement terms and then they'll go out and launch a new private practice beyond their non-compete area. And absolutely non-competes, if you go down the road of a corporate group, will be part of your offer letter. So just like us, associate burnout, attrition rates have increased, staff leaving the field. These are all real day challenges every day, every month. There's some speculation out there that some associates do not want to join a corporate group because there may be daily quotas of a product or procedures required. We got one quote from an associate that said, look, I have to sell 25 heartworm tests per day or I get dinged. Some associates are specifically seeking out independent owned practices because they don't want to be part of the corporate world for whatever reason that might be. One quote here, I do not want to become another anonymous cog in the machine. I want to work at a place where I know and trust the people that I see every day. So who are some of the non-corporate buyers that are out there? Obviously in our region, Washington State, Colorado State, really leading the charge for placing veterinarians in our communities, and respect both of these institutions tremendously. Location. Just like with your residential real estate, these buyers are looking at where can they identify a practice that's going to be successful, has the right number of people in the community, has the right number of affluency where they're going to be able to pay procedures. Good practices in good locations are still selling, whether it's a single or multi-doctor practice. And values really have been steady, even though interest rates have been rising. They have stabilized. Again, I go back to many banks have these specialized departments that just focus on veterinary hospital owners or wannabe hospital owners. I recently worked with a buyer in the Southwest area, and she was able to get a 15-year loan at 5.4% interest rate. Definitely been a shift in buyer demographics over the last 5 to 7 years. There's definitely more female veterinarians that are buying. In 2010, it was really about 50-50 male to female ratio. Looking at last year's data nationally, it's about 63 to 37 female to male. So again, some of these non-corporate buyers, past practice owners who sold to corporates and now are going to leave, and they maybe want to run a boutique operation. Maybe they want to go to a community and have a mobile. A lot of different options out there. If you still want to stay engaged, there are buyers out there. Some private owners are basically looking to open up a second location or maybe a satellite location. They're looking to expand, they're looking to grow. They maybe feel like they found the special sauce, the secret sauce in what it takes to run a successful hospital. There are small regional groups, local groups that are buying single doctor practices, doing innovative ideas to try to help them grow. They don't necessarily have, 50 hospitals. They may just have 5 hospitals, but they're looking to support from that local regional area. And really, I would say in general, even though, through the election, post-COVID, even into now, we've seen interest rates kind of bounce all over the place. It's really having a smaller effect on practice purchases. So I think that's actually a victory for both buyers and sellers right now. At the beginning of the year, at the end of the year, there was some election cause of pause because no one really knew what was going to happen with the economy, different ideas going around. That has kind of dissipated, I would say, here into the second quarter of 2025, where there's been a lot more activity and confidence in the economy. And obviously, number one person out there that's a non-corporate buyer is the first-time practice owner that's really looking to take this challenge on and become a small business owner in America. So young buyers, an overview of kind of what you need to know about young buyers. This is the millennial and Gen Z generation. There may be some hesitation or resistance in making a commitment. Definitely want the pretty nice, shiny, newer practices. They're not necessarily interested in doing a flip. They're used to having all the bells and whistles coming out of school with up-to-date current technology. This is going to be something they're going to be looking at. They do have high school debt, and sometimes this can cause pause in the timeline of when they decide to buy. May or may not be as prepared coming out of school as prior generations. And I state that just from talking to owners that have sold that maybe graduated vet school in the 50s or 60s or 70s. That's kind of their opinion versus an Omni or my opinion. If you do have associates on your staff and they haven't necessarily expressed the interest to own, one of the things that I think owners can do in kind of stepping out of maybe their comfort zone or thinking that they need to do this is really educate your associates on why they should want to become an entrepreneur and a small business owner. Talk to them about the benefits because some of them just didn't have this business training while they were at school, or potentially a practice that they started at out of school. And we have heard from some of the younger generation that are coming out where they just didn't have the ability to have training while at school to understand what it took to be a small business owner. Those are things that you can do to help. And even if you have a single veterinary hospital, if you have a single vet that's looking to take over, I would highly recommend supporting that person, whether it's through 3 months full-time and then going to part-time, but talking to them about how you're going to potentially hold their hand on this journey of taking over a hospital and becoming an owner. There's some discussion of limited training on surgical technique. Again, this goes back to mentoring. Make these potential buyers feel comfortable that they can take this responsibility over and do a great job. And then there's different expectations, whether it's flexibility, pay, vacation. These are all things that are kind of going through their mind as they consider potentially being an owner. So for a lot of sellers that I deal with, once we've got the offer, we've got the purchase price nailed down, they think it's a straight road. And what I can tell you, it's more like Lombard Street in San Francisco. There's going to be a lot of zigs and zags through the entire process, whether that's through the due diligence, whether that's through what the bank needs, whether that's through the attorneys negotiating some of the agreements. It's never a straight road. Be patient. But time does kill deals. So we do recommend keeping the process flowing and moving once you get under LOI, again, whether you are a buyer or a seller. So how to prepare for the future? Plan ahead. We recommend starting this process at least 5 years out. Rural single doctor practices, I think you can plan on a minimum of it potentially taking 2 to 3 years to sell your hospital. Urban single doctor practices, probably a year to a year and a half. And even 2 doctor practices still might take a year, depending on location and the makeup of your current location, as far as a real estate and building standpoint. We highly recommend getting a valuation done. You might be ready to sell. I call it a business physical. I think most of us have probably gone to the doctor, once a year to get your physical done. But if you're an owner on this webinar today, ask yourself, when is the last time you got an analysis done on a business physical? It can really open your eyes on things that you can improve on, things that you can prepare for to maximize the opportunity to sell your hospital, because we realize you only have one chance to do this. So this goes along with just a practice assessment and valuation. One of the things we're going to look at is, are you overstaffed? What is your support staff to DVM ratio? Have you raised your fees lately? Is there any consistency on when you're raising your fees? What kind of procedures are you offering? Is your competition offering it and you're not? Is your practice appealing to a buyer? And I can't underestimate and undervalue what Google ratings and other media platforms can do for your business, particularly with the younger buyer. So plan ahead. Are you the owner of the real estate? Are you leasing? If you are leasing the building, do you have 5 years left, or do you have a 5-year option? Is there a teardown clause? Will the landlord extend a lease to a new tenant? Is there any room for expansion? And then if you own the building, do you plan on selling the real estate along with the practice, or do you want to play landlord for a little while? Do you have an oil tank or other hazardous perils located on location or next door? Are you next to a gas station or dry cleaner? We kind of bring those 2 points up because, particularly here in Colorado, but in most states in the country, those can complicate a real estate transaction. And then identifying, do you have any early payment penalties on your loan, if you still have one? So plan ahead from a cleanup standpoint. You want to clean up everything. You want to clean up your financials. Are you running personal expenses through the practice? Travel? Is there extra staff or family on the payroll? Is there unreported cash? Are you not recording certain expenses or revenues? If you are the building owner, Is your rent high or low compared to the market value? Because those are things that the bank is absolutely going to look at. From a sloppy bookkeeping standpoint, we recommend hiring a qualified accountant. There are numerous groups out there now that are accounting firms that only focus on veterinary practices. They can provide valuable insights and support that they know and see from other clients that they have. And I would definitely hire or consult with tax planning and strategy for the sale so that Uncle Sam is not taking up additional funds at closing that you could have potentially saved if we strategized appropriately. And we highly recommend that your P&L is cleaned up with a lot of these bullet point areas at least 2 to 3 years before selling, so that, again, you can maximize the payment that you're going to get. And it also helps support the buyer because it gives the bank more confidence in the loan. So kind of planning ahead, a light remodel, totally fine, totally appropriate. Paint and tile can be a minor expense for an excellent ROI. We do not recommend any major renovations 5 years prior to selling because you're just not going to get a return on that investment. You won't have had time to recapture the costs, particularly with construction costs and labor in that field that we're seeing right now. No major equipment purchases. Declutter the office. Been into so many places where there's kayaks, bike storage, laundry rooms are packed, closet is packed. With technology today, when you work with Omni, if you decide to, part of our business presentation to all potential buyers is we take an extensive video tour of the practice because it is the best way to immediately show off your hospital to people all over the country. They can get that quick preview and say, wow, that place looks like it's brand new, or wow, I'm going to have to put some work into cosmetically, maybe cleaning that up to the way I like it or the way I think it's going to attract new clients in the way I want to grow. Do a deep cleaning, remove all the smells. Review your contract status with all your vendors or leased equipment that will be transferred at sale. Make sure it can be done. Are there any contracts that you might have to buy out? And we definitely recommend a printout or a picture of your practice floor plan. So what makes a practice attractive and unique in today's market? Well, the first thing a younger buyer is going to be looking at is technology. Is there AI utilization? There are so many different software tools out there right now that can cut down on your chart noting. Highly recommend, if you haven't looked into that. I just recently sold a practice where she was using, I think it's called AI Scribenote. And after she got the hang of it, it was saving her 9 hours a week in charting. We're looking at, is it a paperless practice? Or are there still charts everywhere? Is it integrated PIMS with the equipment? Do you have a website? You got to have a website. It can't just be Facebook anymore. You've got to have a landing page, because what we need to do, and we'll talk about this further at the bottom, but we've got to promote this on all the different social media sites. From an infrastructure standpoint, are you species specific? Do you have one exam room per doctor? Boarding and grooming is no longer as attractive unless it's accompanied by and part of a growing pet resort that is part of your business. And that's really changed over the last 5 to 7 years. From a clinical services standpoint, do your profit centers include surgery, dentistry, ultrasound, urgent care services, any and all the above? Think about that. And then patient and client satisfaction. We want to have high Google scores and reviews, Facebook activity, potentially even TikTok and Instagram. Again, I have a recent client that she was in her 60s, knew nothing about TikTok, nothing about Instagram, dove right into it, started putting some of her really cool procedures on there. The next thing you know, she's got 90,000 likes on a couple of them, and it's generating activity. And when I say generating activity, what I mean is that she was having clients come from an hour away because they had seen this doctor perform the procedure, that their Fluffy or whatever animal they needed to get done, they felt confident in this doctor. And it was even attracting current veterinary student candidates who wanted to do internships or possibly find out if there were openings to work there when they got out of school. So don't underestimate that. And then the other thing I'll add there from a corporate standpoint, some of the corporate groups will actually, they'll look at your P&L to look at your total revenue. And then the next most important thing to them and their measurement of success is going to your Google reviews. Yelp kind of follows along those lines, but really Google is the one that's driving that. And if your Google scores or any complaints haven't been addressed, it really makes them take a step back to evaluate if they want to consider acquisition. So again, if we're talking about ways to optimize revenue, you really want to enhance the client experience. Personalized care, offer personalized treatment plans and follow-ups to build that strong relationship and trust with your clients. So they not only stay there with you for this pet, but potentially future pets and maybe even their entire family. Digital engagement, just like we talked about, social media, newsletters, sharing tips and updates of what's going on. Provide a feedback mechanism. Implement a system to gather and act on client feedback to continuously improve your services. Number 2, expand your services offered. Wellness programs. Are you doing wellness programs right now? If you're not, consider introducing wellness plans that can provide routine care at a fixed cost, and it encourages more frequent visits. Is telemedicine that you want something you want to consider? Offer virtual consultations for minor concerns. Even it can be questions. This could be with you as the doctor. It could be you with a technician. It can even be that face-to-face interaction with a support staff member. Maybe they're just trying to book an appointment. And then pet wellness workshops. Host events and webinars on pet care to engage and educate the community. And then the final two there, number 3, optimize operations, efficient scheduling. There's so many different types of software to optimize appointment scheduling, minimize wait time, and really maximize your staff and their service effectively and efficiently. Inventory management. We highly recommend a robust system to manage your medications and supplies, reducing waste and costs. If you have too much supplies on the shelf, that's just money that you're burning through that's sitting on your shelf, and it may expire. You may not ever use it. And then foster community engagement, local partnerships, pet shops, shelters, community programs and events. And then you can even do a loyalty program, create a reward system for referrals or frequent visits. Encourage existing clients to bring in new business, new clients, and give them a bonus. I had one doctor, every holiday, they had this little display out front in the lobby, whether it was Halloween, St. Patrick's Day, and they had little costumes that they could put on the animals, and they would take pictures of the animals. They would get consent from the client. They would send it out, the great cute pictures to the client. And then with that permission, they would blast it all over their social media. And then, do you need an associate? If you're busting at the seams, recruit, do everything legal. Omni does not advocate for kidnapping any associates out there, but try to recruit from corporates, local areas. Again, social media can be an avenue. And then you can also talk about if you find an associate that may be interested, but is not quite ready to become an owner, maybe talk to them about how they can get equity in the practice currently. So if that is the scenario that you go down, we highly recommend that you do it right immediately. Get an associate agreement in place, an employment agreement with that associate. Determine when the associate will buy in. It's possible that you can even place money in escrow from the associate's salary to help them save to buy in. That makes it harder for them to leave. One of the most important things to do if you're going to go down this route is to get a value of your business before they start so that we know what the value of the hospital is today and then what the value is the hospital is in 1 year, 3 years, 5 years when they decide to buy in. You know, what we've seen is it's a failure rate of right around 70% if it's not done correctly right out of the gate. And then is it time to buy or expand your veterinary practice? You know, clients and patients, are you maxed out? Evaluate your current demand. Are your days fully booked with clients and patients? Do you have to turn away appointments due to limited capacity? If yes, it might be time to consider expanding or buying a new location or moving. Owning allows you to hire support staff and manage the patient load more efficiently. Financial preparedness. Are you ready to own? Know your financial position, review and know your credit score, your debt, your savings, and what cash flow you can get from the opportunity. Understand what the cost of ownership is, down payments, renovations, staffing, equipment. Financial literacy is key to long-term success. And we can absolutely help you explore financing options and lender requirements. We've got numerous banks, and we always at minimum recommend 3 banks and 3 attorneys to anyone that's considering buying a hospital. Market conditions. Why now may be the right time. Veterinary market in 2025 shows historic pet ownership. The demand for specialty services and urgent care is increasing. There's favorable real estate conditions for leasing or buying. And Omni can actually provide a custom market analysis for your area of the country that you're looking for. And then really, as you get into this, you need to define your goals. What kind of practice do you want? Clarify your ownership vision. Is it going to be community focused from a solo practitioner standpoint? Do you want to open a multi-location group? Do you want to open a multi-doctor location? Do you want to specialize in urgent care, exotic pets, dentistry? Do you want to specialize? Do you want to just invest in a practice? Know your long-term goals because that's going to help shape your purchase strategy. Kind of the last parts here. We want to help you build your ownership path. Are you ready to take the next step? We can guide you, both buyers and sellers, through financial planning, market research, business valuation, and transition planning. Let's turn your ownership goals or your exit strategy into a clear action plan. So Ziggy and I, that's our presentation for the night. My contact information, if you want to take note of that, happy to provide it at any time. Don't see any questions. I'd be happy to open things up for any Q&A. I know we kind of covered a lot there in about 45, 50 minutes, but happy to try to respond to anything, whether it's related to the presentation or even a one-off. Okay. Well, thank you all. Oh, we've got one coming in here. So the question is, what are the multiples for single doctor practices? So very loaded question and really depends on a multitude of factors. First and foremost, we would need to look at location, current revenue that the practice is generating, and then the next step of that would be the number of exam rooms. That's going to dictate if a person from a corporate group is going to extend an offer. If it is a private buyer, that's where it can kind of take a zig and a zag. So if there is not a corporate group that is interested in a single doctor practice, then it's up to the person that's buying the hospital to go get bank financing. Most banks will finance up to about 85% of the last year or trailing 12 months revenue number. So if the single doctor practice is generating $1 million in revenue, typically with decent or pretty good credit, they will loan up to $850,000. If that buyer does not have any additional savings, their max offer in most cases is going to be $850,000. So that can be kind of a metric that you can look at to kind of calculate what your purchase price would be. Any additional follow-up or question based on that response? Okay. Any other questions out there? One thing that's interesting, I'll just kind of wrap up here on one thing. We've got one corporate group that we're working with right now that's got a really interesting model. They typically go into partnership with single doctor practices that they've identified that they're in a market that could benefit from additional urgent care services. So what they'll do is they'll create a joint venture model with the current 1DVM hospital. They will bring in a doctor and support staff to open the current practice for urgent care hours. And then they will work together for 2 to 3 years to grow that practice's revenue and make it more valuable. And then try to sell to a corporate group now offering, standard companion care, but also urgent care services. The challenge there for some of I think it's a great model. It's very cool. It's out of the box thinking. One of the challenges there for some single doctors, they're not looking to do that urgent care model for 3 years and then go to corporate and then sign another 3 to 5 year employment agreement, which means they could potentially be working another 8 to 10 years. So something I explore with all my clients that are single doctor practices, if it's something that they would like to evaluate. But that's where there are different models out there, and it's good to know where to get in touch with those people if it's something that you're interested in. So another one. How is the market for mixed animal practice versus small animal? Great question, especially here in Colorado and quite frankly, the Mountain West. So if you're going the route of a corporate acquisition, there are some groups that will not touch mixed animal at all. Particularly if a larger portion of their revenue is dedicated to that large animal, because many of the corporate groups have had a challenge in recruiting doctors that want to work on large animal. Now, if it makes up, I would say 30 to 35% or less of the overall revenue of the practice, most corporate groups are completely fine with that. It really comes down to what is their comfort level in their recruiting teams and their historical success in recruiting doctors that want to work in a mixed animal hospital. And then from a private buying standpoint, it really comes down to finding that buyer that wants to do both. And there still are some people out there for sure. Whether it's they want to have a portion of their business in equine, a portion of their business being exotic, or even I was just at the Idaho State Conference this past weekend, and I probably had more bovine conversations that I've had in the last 2 years. So definitely not going away. Depending on if you're a buyer or a seller, the timing of that really is what would dictate success or how long it might actually take. Hopefully that answered your question. Okay. Well, look, I very much appreciate everyone stopping by and spending an hour this evening with myself and Omni. If you have any questions at all, don't hesitate to reach out to me, whether it's a one-off conversation kicking tires, or you want to do evaluation to do that business physical, or you just want to talk in general about the market in a little further depth as it pertains to your practice or your interest, whether you're a buyer or a seller. And if you did find this interesting, we'd love your feedback and definitely appreciate everyone attending this evening. So thank you and have a great 4th of July. And I hope all of you don't have a bunch of crazy cases with fireworks and scared animals. Have a good evening.